Well, hello everybody. This is Craig Watson from the Pacific War Channel. I'm joined by, the notorious two guys that are in every single podcast with me. Justin.
What's up?
And Ian.
Hello everyone.
If you are watching this in a video format, if I put it up, Ian is wearing a Godzilla shirt straight out of Japan. Stand up to show it.
It's a pretty awesome shirt. My brother just came back from Japan. He picked this up for me. It's that iconic photo of, that iconic 1954 Godzilla.
Well, it's on the poster of the original film.
But color. Yeah, but this is colorized, so it's like. It's pretty cool. And I got sunglasses on, so I'm looking extra nerdy and douchey today.
Yeah. So, honestly, this is spur of the moment kind of stuff here. I literally took my friends hostage. We were having a few drinks. It's actually I think it's the first day of summer in Canada.
It's not.
It's starting to be nice out there.
I think we've already done Naked Day, but technically today I think would be Naked Day.
Day?
Okay, so to your American audience, probably doesn't know what that means, but Montreal has a thing, and it is called Naked Day, because we get some pretty brutal winters here in Montreal, and we got to cover up, and it's, we get used to minus 30s. And usually around April, May, we'll get one super nice day
sunny,
out of nowhere, and it usually follows up a cold spell.
At least rain or cold, yeah.
But all of a sudden, it's beautiful out, the sun is out, it's 20 degrees, and they call it Naked Day because all of a sudden everyone's wearing as little clothing as possible, just getting into that early summer vibe.
Yeah.
I just want to say I've lived in Canada my entire life. I have never heard of Naked Day. This is something that these two made up in their basement when they were drinking. I don't know. I have never heard of
2 minutes ago, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So
I've heard other people call the first beautiful day in Montreal, during the year, it is called Naked Day, because if you go out to the parks or that, the girls are wearing
the gals.
The ladies. Sundresses come out, and it's...
it must be nice to be young, to venture into those waters.
I mean, you could still go to the park.
No.
Well,
I'm not legally allowed, actually.
According to the old guys I work with, that's what the dark sunglasses are for, so your wife
doesn't
there we
see
go.
where you're looking. Glasses on today.
Every time my old cook goes to the beach, that's what he does. I need dark sunglasses. The sun's really strong.
When you're buying sunglasses,
so my wife
you gotta
doesn't
look
see
at the
where I
tint,
look.
Can you see the eyes through the sunglasses?
Hey everyone, I just wanted to let you know I now have a Patreon account found at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Over there you can find exclusive Patreon episodes and podcasts based on suggestions from patrons, and other benefits like early access to all of my content, live hangouts, your name in the end credits, and much, much more. So please go check it out. I think I'll get to the subject matter for the audience who's what the fuck am I like? Sorry for the cursing also. So this, I guess I'm going to title this one The Atlantic versus the Pacific. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just, the naval wars per se, but pretty 80% at least. But I thought it'd be kind of cool to just compare and talk about the major differences.
Like comparisons between the two, because
they're very different.
They're very different, and they happen at slightly different times. One learning from the other.
Wait, I know this one. One's saltwater, one's freshwater, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. See, solved.
You got the Soho salmon, and then you got the Atlantic salmon. That was the major difference.
Atlantic salmon's retard salmon, by the way.
Can't say the R word anymore. Thanks for fucking throwing that one down.
The Canadian salmon industry, Atlantic salmon is known as the mentally challenged salmon.
They're mutated.
They come from salmon farms, and they're just not regulated well enough. So
it's the same in the States. They have the same farms as us.
You get weird looking salmons, and you'll always notice a difference between an Atlantic salmon and a Pacific salmon because we're not allowed to.
We're not allowed to fish Atlantic salmon.
We're not allowed to fish. Yeah, it is protected because it is an endangered species. Easy to farm, but it doesn't come out the same way.
Yeah. Same for tilapia. But tilapia, it's a bottom-feeding fish.
No, tilapia is a piss fish.
Yeah, it's gross. Oh, yeah, so we've gone into a lot of weird subjects. But, I won't ask Justin this because we're kind of putting Justin in the hot seat. But, Ian, if you're thinking off the top of your head, what says to you the Atlantic War and what says to you the Pacific War? What's, the first things that come to mind?
But considering like on the waters or just
Navy wise, sure.
Okay, Navy wise. So one thing you would see in the Pacific is large armadas, large fleets.
Surface fleets, yeah.
Surface fleets, yeah. You didn't see that as much in the Atlantic, because that was the nature of how the Battle of the Atlantic unfolded. You gauge the two opponents. The British had a much larger surface fleet than
the Germans.
The Germans. So the Germans, they knew they would never win a pitched battle against the.
There's not going to be a battle of the Jutland like World War I.
So their way of going about this was send their ships off in secrecy and basically go out there and just start raiding Allied shipping lanes.
Pretty much.
And hit and run. Try to avoid pitched battles unless it's deemed favorable.
So for Justin, who's kind of remained as the cornerstone of this podcast series for
not knowing what the fuck I'm talking about?
Like 2 years. But you've always kind of called yourself Mr. Economics. What's interesting, I'd say, both sides have this kind of feature, but in the Atlantic, you have one side, Nazi Germany. They don't have the ability to afford a large surface fleet to compete with the British. Mm-hmm. So what you probably heard about the U-boats,
but they almost did acquire the French.
Were they actually?
That would have changed things.
Yeah,
were they actually U-shaped?
Yeah, sure.
I'm
just has to go with the translation. It's like, they're the underwater boats. So in German,
okay, so that does make sense.
Yeah, why it became the U-boat, actually, I have no idea why English people started to call them that. It somehow came about. But what notoriously is kind of like
it was
the theme.
World War One, though, for sure.
Yeah, well, the Germans had really pioneered the real use of U-boats in World War One. There's a similarity. World War One, World War Two, Germany kind of did kind of the same thing, where instead of trying to really challenge the British in a big surface engagement, big battleships and all this stuff, they really just tried to squeeze Britain of all of its money and supplies.
Straight.
Yeah.
Well, but didn't learn the lesson well enough.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say. I mean, give me some rope here. Let me go through this and then let me know how wrong or how off I am. But obviously, most of World War II's taken place, or all of World War II taken place in Europe. Most of the Allied forces, U.S. and Great Britain, coming from overseas. So obviously, any troops, any supplies, almost anything that gets brought over there
for the West,
has to be done either by land or by air. One of those two.
Air really wasn't feasible.
Or by sea or by
air.
There
were options, like in the Mediterranean. They did fly certain things like tanks and all this, but it's like a fraction.
All by transatlantic flights at the time were basically all fuel.
Yeah. So even if Germany has less resources, their resources are all right there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
whereas everybody else has to boat them in. So if you can disturb those boat lines,
it was the
very
same thing
much
for
like
Napoleon.
the invasion of Manchuria, where they're trying to control the railways and keep supplies from coming in. If you cut off the supply line, you have a chance at winning the war.
The logistics plays probably
wins
the
wars.
biggest. Yeah, it plays the biggest part in a war for sure.
I'm going to venture a guess, and even though you already said it's not much of a guess, but I'm going to venture a guess that Germans couldn't take on the American or the British fleet head on. Even when they started, we're all Sabaton fans. I've heard the song Bismarck. I've seen the video.
They had that one,
very big, very nice ship. But again, one is not going to take out the entire British fleet.
It got focus fired.
Okay. So it seems like that's kind of what they had to do, was more the sneak attack, just kind of like come around in the dark and poke little holes in the U.S. and British supply line and hope that it would
I thank you for mentioning the Bismarck in that, because that is a great example of the futility of the Mahan Doctrine in World War II.
Yeah.
Where, like, okay, the biggest ship wins the war, and the Bismarck was the biggest ship in the Atlantic, and it was the biggest ship until the Yamato was launched. Now,
True.
Hitler was like, okay, we need more bigger ships, because like, after the Bismarck, he was already going on to Plan Z with like their
All those ships.
crazy.
If you're playing World
of Warships,
yeah, all
ships.
the paper ships.
But the paper ships, but yeah, those were that was supposed to be the next line of German battleships coming out in 44, 45, and they would be absolutely massive, similar or larger to the Yamato. But the Bismarck, big ship, cost more. It was like 8 or 10 U-boats you could build for that price.
Yeah, for sure.
Or even more. Or,
it's the cost of scrap iron.
4 heavy cruisers. And you think about it, like, yeah, the Germans could not contest the British because the British had their numbers and they had big ships too.
Well, the British had more time because the British had been building up and redesigning
over
their fleet.
300 years.
I mean, because even in World War One, the British had to make the decision to go from coal to oil, which, like, surprisingly, the Russians were the first to actually really do that. It took so much money and effort, and for the Germans, it didn't make sense because you're stuck in Central Europe. Your enemies are surrounding you. You're going to be 80% of the time fighting an enemy on the land. It didn't make sense to put that much money into it. And Adolf Hitler, because Donitz, the commander of the Navy, he went on the record.
Who did become? He was the last.
He was the last.
He was the last leader of the Nazi Reich.
Yeah, he had to surrender. He went on the record and he blamed Hitler. He said Hitler just didn't believe in the Navy and wouldn't put money towards it.
Yeah, Donitz was pushing. Donitz is the architect of the Wolf Pack and the Battle of the Atlantic, and the architect of all its successes. And he passed on all the information to Hitler and his group of sycophants, and. Okay, U-boats are winning, but we can't keep this momentum up. We need more and more and more, because every time we go on a sortie, we got to go back.
The problem is, when they started the war,
Hitler
they weren't crazy about U-boats.
No, I want big boats like the Bismarck.
Well, he didn't know.
The
there was no money put towards big boats. They, what was it? Albert Speer had there was a meeting.
They built a Graf Zeppelin.
Yeah, but it never went out.
Still wasted money on it. Never went out.
Hitler wasted money on a lot of bullshit in World War II. The mouse tank. I mean, Hitler wasted a lot of money. But Albert Speer went on the record, and he had argued with Donitz in front of Hitler. He said, "Hey, you want to build more Bismarck-class battleships?" He's like, "You're going to be wasting like millions of dollars, and then 10 years from now, it's scrap iron. Why not? Like, just go build aircraft."
At the same time, they're facing a reduction in steel output and it's needed on the Eastern Front to build Tiger tanks, and he's about to come out with the King Tiger 2, and it's like that one's even more steel. Like,
so now tell me something though, because you said for a while the U-boats were actually winning. Mm-hmm. What did the Alliance? What did USA and Great Britain do to stop that? What did they change?
That's a very interesting question.
So there's three big reasons why the U-boats were finally defeated. It did take a while. The first reason is the Allies came up with a convoy system. The second reason is the British had unbelievable intelligence during World War II. Something called the Enigma machine. That this was only declassified actually, like in the 90s.
You know what? A film that does it so well. What is it?
Something game.
The Intimidation game or
Imitation game.
Imitation.
Yeah, with Bernard Cumberbatch. It's beautifully done.
And then the third thing, Benedict Cumberbatch.
What did I say?
Bernard.
Yeah. Apologies to Mr. Cumberbatch.
Usually people screw up his last name, not his first name.
And the third thing was, at the very beginning of the war, they didn't have long-range aircrafts. So the Atlantic pretty big.
That's the big thing.
So basically, actually Canadians had a lot to do with this too.
Yeah.
The B-24 Liberator ended up being kind of the prize. They managed to build a modification for the B-24 so it could go just further out. And what was like kind of the crucial component of defeating the U-boats, these submarines, was these planes could go over with radar and other means to like visually see submarines, so that destroyers or other vehicles could throw depth charges. Because until like there was like a coordination between the aircrafts and these other surface ships, getting these submarines was really tricky. You're always sacrificing somebody to get hit by a sub to get them to come up to hit them.
If I may pause you for a second, just to add on to what you're saying. So, like, the U-boats were extremely effective in the Atlantic. So imagine it's like a net.
Yeah.
Like, and this is their area of operation, and it was like pretty much the entirety of the Atlantic at the beginning of the war. Like, they were going into the St. Lawrence here in Canada.
It was their pond. Yeah.
They were right beside the ports of America, and their net was huge. So it became imperative that they shrink that net.
Yeah.
So all the technologies that the Allies were developing at the time, radar, the most pivotal was air power.
Yeah.
Was shrinking that net by having air power that could probe further into the ocean, spot them, and then it just became a game of shrinking that net of the U-boats until the time that the U-boats their net was small, easier to find. But they couldn't operate outside that net anymore because it's too dangerous for them.
And something that's not very intuitive, because you never think this, for submarines to be very effective against the enemy, they actually need aircraft support. So aircrafts are good spotters, and they can actually tell a submarine where they can safely go, safely not go. And the Germans did not ever acquire, well, they did have long-range aircrafts, but not en masse.
Yeah.
And the Allies
Their
just
air
ate
power
them
in
to
the
it.
Atlantic was very minimal.
Well, the Luftwaffe really fucked up that game.
The Luftwaffe didn't want to play ball with the Navy. That's the thing.
I mean, it's even more than that. Like, they were going in a different direction. Like, there was a huge different direction with what the Luftwaffe was doing by the end of the war. And they really dropped the ball, whereas the Allies had kind of focused their attention. Because for the Allies, the entire game in the Atlantic was, we need to make sure that the supplies and men get to Britain, and then later on to France and stuff. So they had to ensure it. So they built a convoy system. Like, there was like 60 plus ships, because they found at the beginning when they just sent...
So they basically just escort all the supply ships with military ships.
It's not just that. This is kind of hard.
They used to send off all the ships off
individually,
basically on their own. You know, like, okay, 2-3 ships together, and a lone U-boat could just easily just take it out. U-boats just scattered across the Atlantic, and they're just always gonna come across a ship
at least
or
a few
two,
ships.
and they're just like they're easy
hunting.
pickings. They're hunting. They loose all their torpedoes, great torpedoes.
Yeah.
Just about every single torpedo, a hit, detonation, ship down.
That's important. The Germans had fully functioning torpedoes, good doctrine. They came into the war. I mean, they had already learned a lot of lessons of World War I, because the Germans, I want to say, they're probably the pioneers of real submarine warfare.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It was World War One. They really.
So when World War II began, especially for the United States, when the United States entered the war, all the U-boats, they were hitting them from their ports on the East Coast. It was really bad for the United States, and you have to imagine. So the Germans have a system where they're just scattering these U-boats, and they know kind of generally the routes that any Allied ships are coming from Newfoundland or wherever. So the Allies are just throwing ships individually, and they're getting sunk.
Every single U-boat making kills.
Yeah.
Go back to port, get more torpedoes, a little bit of wear and tear repair on the sub, and then back out to it, facing little to no consequences at all. So eventually the Allies were like, what if we group
all
our
these
ships
boats
en masse
together, and then we know if we put
Send
like
a couple,
60 ships,
couple destroyers with it.
even if they get attacked, a few of them will get taken down, but a large mass of them will make it to the place, because it's like you're just playing a game of statistics. Yeah. The Germans have to keep all these U-boats all over the place because you don't know which route they're going to take. Yeah. And now, instead of all these boats coming like this, they're going to be coming in a big cluster. So statistically, it just won the day.
If it's if one or two U-boats are in the path of that convoy, it's not going to do the same damage as, say, that said convoy going off individually, and then each one of them has a high chance of coming across a U-boat.
Yeah. Well, it has to be a big thing too. I mean, if you're a U-boat and you see like 2 piddly ships come along, you figure, I got a pretty good chance to take one of these out and get away scot-free.
Both of them probably.
When you see a 60 ship convoy and you say, okay, well, if we attack this, it's basically a suicide mission. A lot of those guys might just turn around and fuck off home.
Well, what they would do is because they knew, okay, as soon as we hit the convoys, there's other ships there, and they're probably going to have a couple escort vessels. Okay, so we loose our torpedoes, and then it's either go deep, as they say, and go silent, or get the hell out of Dodge. And so they were less effective in that way because a U-boat or two, they can only launch a couple of torpedoes at a time. They're putting themselves in danger because now the escort vessels are coming at them. What was the Germans' counter to the Allies' counter to the U-boat?
Wolfpacks.
And this is the introduction of the Wolfpack.
So now you had all these scattered U-boats. Now they were clustering. They were working together because they said, "Hey, we got to hit a big punch if we catch one of these convoys." So then the Wolfpack emerged, which did a shit ton of damage. To the convoy system.
And this is where like we saw the Battle of Atlantic, how effective it was, and this is when Donuts went to Hitler's like, "I need more U-boats. Like we can win this." If you give me more U-boats.
They honestly, it was an effective strategy. It proved itself during World War One. Multiple years in World War One, the British were starved, like literally starved. And if the Germans, they're worried eventually they're worried about the Russians because they go to war with the Soviet Union. But if they can at least keep everything in the West from coming onto land, they've won the day.
Of course.
And it was an effective strategy. Unfortunately, Germany was kind of, they didn't pick their battles well.
They were still investing in the big battleship. It was like Hitler was like, okay, they had the Bismarck and the Tirpitz, but he was
Hitler was spending the money on other people.
The next step for the Kriegsmarine for him was the Plan Z, and the Plan Z, like their paper ships, were
stupid.
These gargantuan vessels of
but Hitler was inspired by Japan, what they were doing and stuff, and he wanted his own. Yeah, but that's not the problem was the money was going to the Luftwaffe and it was going to probably land forces mostly, for the armor tanks and stuff. But I just realized we haven't talked about the Pacific at all.
I know. Well, this is what I've been pushing for. Well, maybe not pushing, but like I want to do more Atlantic stuff, and now we're just touching the Battle of the Atlantic, and it's.
Well, here we'll bring it to. There's a huge difference when it comes to we'll talk about submarine
warfare.
Submarine warfare in the
Pacific
Pacific is completely different. So, Justin, Japan is an island nation just like Britain. Mm-hmm. Everything they need is shipped around.
Yep.
So, you would imagine protecting we call it the merchant fleet would be very important within their sphere of interest. So, Japan starts this war with the United States, and they basically erect this huge perimeter that encompasses all these islands and stuff, and they're transporting from these islands because these islands have oil and other resources that they needed, literally the lifeblood of their empire. And you would assume that they would probably have a decent doctrine on how to protect it.
I'm guessing they had no clue.
They just hoped to God their navy would eventually just destroy the other navy, and that was basically their entire plan.
Our dick is bigger than yours, and let's hope that holds up.
Yeah. And what's so ironic about the Japanese, for about 70% of the war, they only, basically late 43 and early 44, they changed their mind. They had this doctrine where they believed it was dishonorable for their submarines to attack merchant fleets. So the Americans are sending a lot of their supplies to, let's say, Australia, right?
Okay.
Pretty obvious route, too.
Yep.
Japanese didn't attack it. They're just like, no, it's dishonorable. They thought their doctrine for their submarines, which were the biggest submarines in World War II.
So military versus military.
That's it. So their submarines, they expected their submarines to fight in combat. Like Battle of Midway, they fully expected their submarines to go after the enemy carriers, which actually one of the carriers the Americans lost, it was a submarine that took it down.
Yeah, the final blow on the final blow in the Yorktown was the
submarine.
Yeah.
And the Japanese made enormous submarines. So everybody else had...
They had great submarines, by the way. They're really good.
But it's almost kind of like Hitler's tanks. They made these enormous outfitted submarines that even had midget submarines in them sometimes, which they used for raiding. And they had...
Raiding and kamikaze.
Their entire doctrine was the submarine is an aggressive weapon that fights other naval ships. Mm-hmm. And that it would go between fleets and attack and stuff. And when the Americans, for half of the war, they have a problem with their torpedoes. So the torpedoes for their...
Not just a problem.
Enormous problem.
Yeah.
So the torpedoes in their submarines...
So imagine 95% of your
torpedoes
weapons don't work.
Yeah. So the torpedoes in their aircraft and the torpedoes in the submarines, this is the Mark 14 and 15,
And
don't work.
destroyers, cruisers...
well, they don't use the same torpedo, actually. Their destroyers had...
don't work like at all. Literally,
there is 4 major problems with the torpedoes. So torpedoes can blow up by contact. They hit a ship hull, or they blow up magnetically. So if a torpedo goes underneath the ship, there's a magnetic resonance thing that blows it up. The magnetic transponder thing in the torpedoes was malfunctioning, so it just didn't blow up, or it blew up too quickly. Their torpedoes would go way too deep than they should have. So basically, you're not going to hit any of the ships because it's going to go underneath, and now the magnetic responder isn't going to blow them up. If it did hit something, the contact pistol, we call it, so the thing that says, hey, blow up, you've hit something, just didn't work. And they also had, one of the worst things about it is they had this problem where if the torpedo was launched, it would go in circles or go in the opposite direction. These are 4 issues.
These fucking torpedoes?
The United States Navy, and for 2 years...
They refused to admit it because they put their
admit
stamp of approval on it.
They
didn't want to go back. It's like, they didn't want to admit
this is an
that they were
economics
wrong.
thing, yeah. So the United States Navy, they got a few reports about, like, these aren't working, what's going on, and they, like, refused to look into it or to test them. Because they had already put their stamp of approval on it. It would humiliate the Navy, and they were refusing to, like, you know, I guess, do a different model. These 4 issues were eventually solved independently, and as soon as they were solved, I think it's about mid-1943, all of a sudden the Americans are destroying the merchant fleet of the Japanese. It's like unbelievable tonnage of transport ships are going down. And it's honestly one of the biggest reasons the Japanese lost.
So basically, the Americans could have won way sooner if they knew how to actually test their torpedoes properly.
They had an amazing... Because the Americans came into World War II very unprepared. They just didn't have a lot. They had a lot of old doctrine, but they had a submarine fleet near the Philippines under Admiral Thomas Hart. He had a whole fleet of these submarines that could have attacked even the invading Japanese surface ships.
There is one that is super successful.
Yeah, there's this famous
starts
story.
with a D. Goddamn, like his kill count on one sortie.
Yeah, there was a guy, he went out and
he went into a Japanese port, and then he's dueling a destroyer in the port, and that's with these faulty torpedoes, but he got extremely lucky that
they could blow up. There was basically there's something like a 90% chance for one of those 4 reasons
that it was a dud.
But they did get hits. To be honest, the Dutch, who were in the early part of the Pacific War, they had this admiral called Dortmund, and he went to town against the Japanese, and he was using like basically just submarines and destroyers. They had nothing bigger than that, and he was torpedoing the fuck out of the Japanese. Pretty impressive, but again, their torpedoes they didn't have this issue.
Well, only thing that makes me think of, you remember Iron Man 2? I'm gonna hit it with the ex-wife.
Yeah.
And the little thing just pew.
Okay.
Hammer tech. That's all I can think of.
It's funny that you say that because I just saw a YouTube short the other day explaining the ex-wife, and he does, like the hammer tech guy does say in the beginning of the film, it requires acceleration. So like the whole point of that thing, it is a long range weapon and requires acceleration, and then when it hits, then it becomes like nasty. And they did have alternate endings in Iron Man 2. They have like the rough CGI cut of it.
Yeah.
Of him firing the ex-wife, and it does do a massive damage, but it's because it has to get that acceleration. Without the acceleration, it can't prime itself.
Yeah.
Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it. Without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software, and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
Yeah, that's kind of what this reminds me of. Just, we're loaded with all this artillery
Useless
that's
shit,
just
yeah.
completely
But not-
useless. Might as well throw pebbles at them, like... what-
Essentially, that's what was happening. Like
Well,
ships,
they had
ships-
all these torpedoes. They had to
ships
use
would
them.
ships would hear the torpedoes clank against them.
Yeah, the
and,
Japanese.
and
were
they're
just
braced, and they're braced for a really bad impact.
You know, a good movie, the latest Midway movie has a section where they actually show one of the raids that's before Coral Sea, I think, and they had launched torpedoes, some of the torpedo bombers, and
they're
it shows them
hits, and it's
hit,
like, and you
and
ding
then
ding.
and they fall down because
And-
that was the
And
problem.
there's also that one scene in Midway where the like a Dauntless is having a difficult reapproach into the carrier, and the torpedo unlatches itself and starts like going towards the superstructure, and one sailor is there like trying to wrestle the torpedo back, and like it's this epic dramatic moment. Like the torpedo's like 6 inches from like making contact with the superstructure. Chances are, if that torpedo hit that superstructure, nothing would have happened.
Yeah, and I guess because for the audience, Justin is kind of the placement for you guys. For those who don't know like the specifics of World War II, I think something that would be interesting to you to learn is when you think about like, and you play World of Warships, so this is actually good. Naval battles, we don't think about submarines. Usually we think about the battleships, the destroyers, the cruisers, like the big boy ships. And when it comes to the Atlantic, basically 1939 and 1940, the Germans, they do have surface ships.
They had surface ships.
They had good
but-
cruisers. They had,
But the British outnumbered them 4-1,
Yeah.
and the British
it was suicide for them.
The British immediately cut Germany off from being able to sortie their fleet.
Yeah, basically at the very beginning of the war, once Britain had entered, they formed this blockade. So the English Channel and the North Sea, like the Germans are basically they can't get out.
they're stuck in the garage.
As it was called, the home fleet,
The
and
home
it would just operate in the channel and in that
Just
vicinity.
enough to
And-
make sure the British didn't raid them directly, but...
But actually, and this is like I'm really hoping we can do some episodes about this in the future, because the Germans do find ways to get ships out.
Yeah. So the Germans, and even in World War I, it's a very similar scenario. Again, we call it like the raiders, So these are surface ships that try to sneak out, usually cruisers or destroyers.
Pocket battleships.
Pocket battleships, well, they're small, yeah.
Yeah.
And they try to sneak out of a blockade. World War One, World War Two, it's the same situation. And they go and they try to go after merchant ships or anybody smaller because the Germans can't pick a fight with the Royal Navy per se. They have to find isolated people.
Yep.
So the Germans in 39 and 40, they do what they can, and they basically lose their ships. So famously, the Bismarck, it goes out in Operation Wendenboom, and it's a successful operation. But unfortunately, the Bismarck, after they take out something, when on their way back, Churchill basically says, "Everything go out there and hunt down the ship." Because they want, it's like the prestige.
Everything from land, everything from sea, and it was focus fired, and there was the British had miraculously, I was gonna say miraculously damaged it enough to make it an easy target, but at the same time, the German engineering of the guns itself knocked out a lot of its equipment. Yeah, the guns were too heavy for the ship, and they didn't brace a lot of the wires for the shot that it would receive. So when the Bismarck first opened its guns, they lost a lot of their navigation equipment.
Well, it seems to me if the Germans would put so much behind building a giant ship like that too, there has to be a lot of morale and propaganda behind that ship.
Well, absolutely.
This goes into, we built the biggest warship. It's going to win it for us.
That's it, exactly. And this is where
this is our trump card. This is our ace of spades. So I can see why then the Royal Navy would go, you know what, we need to kill that. Because if we kill that, there goes their freaking morale.
It's almost like, I hate to.
But it also was the Germans did hit the British version of that. The hood was their during
well, let's
World War
explain it to
I
Justin.
and
He doesn't know what we're talking about. So the Germans they send out the Bismarck on basically what is a raid, and inadvertently the German Bismarck finds itself fighting the HMS Hood.
Yeah,
which actually a great uncle of mine died on that. So the Hood gets tragically destroyed by the Bismarck, and this is a huge victory for the Bismarck. Okay, because this is a flagship that went out, took out another big ass flagship, and now it's coming back home. It actually gets some repairs.
It was the pride of the British Navy for over 20 years. Yeah. This was their big ship.
But as soon as this happens, Sir Winston Churchill literally opens the floodgates. He says, every fucking ship, every aircraft, go after it, hunt it down.
Liam Neeson moment from Battleship that gets cut out of the movie itself, but it's in the trailer. Fire what?
Fire everything. And then the Bismarck kind of gets this lion's fucking death where it's attacked by so many things. And a lot of people, I guess you can call it kind of the end of the surface engagements in the Atlantic, because there are engagements.
More. I mean, there's
but they're not
they send a lot of pocket battleships outside. I mean, let's look at the Graf Spee.
The Graf Spee.
Well, this was the plan for the Bismarck as well. The Bismarck was eventually supposed to get to South America.
Yeah,
the Germans had allied ports that
Argentina,
they could use.
Chile, a little bit.
And as soon as they birthed themselves in those ports, these are neutral countries. The ships are safe there.
Yeah, that's another funny thing about World War II. You had to respect the neutrality of. Well, you could not respect them too, but you had to respect neutral ports. So a German could be parked at somewhere in Argentina, let's say, and the British technically couldn't attack them and stuff.
And that's what they did often. They would just go back into that port, refuel, rearm, give the sailors a little R&R for 2 weeks, and then they're back on the ocean.
Yeah, but that's the point. It's okay, the port is safe, but if you know the German's there and you're there, just sit there and fucking wait till he leaves. There's not much he can do.
Well, actually, the Germans' playbook in World War II when it came to these surface ships was mostly hiding them using camouflage in random ports. Like the Tirpitz legendarily just spent its whole time hiding out in the Baltic Sea and stuff, right?
Yeah. How do you hide a ship with camouflage? You have to.
This is impressive. Cool, so there's certain diagonal paint jobs and all these weird things you can do from the air. You have to imagine you're an airplane, right? You're 1,000 clicks up. When you look down, there is ways to paint a ship in such a way that it'll look like if it's really side by side in a port or something, you won't see it. Legit. And even
also the paint on the side. Okay, you're looking through.
If you're a surface ship looking out in the
binoculars.
ocean, there's camouflage is a huge deal, and that's the one thing
That means they had to like repaint the ship every 2 seconds,
They
depending
did.
on what angle they're being fucking looked at.
They were doing it all the time.
That was a very common thing about going into port. It's not just about resupplying yourself and giving your sailors a little R&R. It is get on the side of the ship, touch up the paint everywhere. It's just general maintenance. If you run a ship for 3-4 months without going back to port, it's gonna look.
Yeah, I know, but this is not a bedroom wall. It's not like it takes 10 minutes to repaint a fucking battleship.
But also, we're not putting on Lamborghini paint. It's,
But to finish up this podcast, I think one of the biggest comparisons. So we're talking about all the stuff in the Atlantic. The surface engagements are kind of like, I want to say they're small scale. The Germans simply do not have a large fleet. The Italians had a decent sized fleet for the size of their country.
But you don't see big fleet movements, fleets matching each other.
There's no
getting
real,
ready for that big
battle,
pitched
decisive
battle.
battle.
That decisive battle. Where
in the
Pacific, that is like on
it's
both,
an obsession
in both sides' heads. It's like, when is that next decisive battle?
Well, the Americans, for half of the early part of the war, do not want that. They don't want to engage in that. The Japanese had a naval doctrine that Yamamoto adopted from one of his predecessors, goes back to the Russo-Japanese War. Build a decent fleet. It doesn't have to be the largest fleet. Just win one battle that knocks out the enemy's
that
navy.
fleet is the best on the water, and he knew he can never compete with the economy of the States. And the second you take out an American fleet, another one will replace it. He was aware of that.
Yeah, but it takes
but
a
he
year.
also knows 6 months to a year to replace a fleet, and it's brand new sailors and everything. And the Japanese plan was just keep knocking the fleets out one after another, and until America basically sues for peace.
What's a huge difference, as you can see here, is you look at the Atlantic. The German strategy is strangulation with submarines. So going after merchant fleet, not necessarily going after. They don't care about the surface ships. Just strangle the enemy's ability, their logistical line.
Yep.
The Japanese had. I mean, they didn't have as many submarines because tragically they built these very large, very strong submarines.
But they had more of a head-on strategy. We're just gonna fight you, hope we win, and
they wanted to decisively just destroy the American Navy fleet, and to a lesser extent the British and the Dutch.
Their surface fleet, and they really didn't pay any attention to the American submarine fleet.
80% of the war, they didn't even look at the merchant fleet.
The merchant fleet or the submarine fleet, they didn't regard either as really. Like,
they didn't have counter submarine warfare was not really a thing for the Japanese.
It's a thing at like Pearl Harbor and at Midway also. It gets brought up like, as the battle drags on, it's like, the American submarines are on their way, like we have to move. And that is the logical choice. So they do recognize the submarines as a threat, but they only recognize the American submarines as a threat to their own surface warships.
Yes, because the Nautilus
eventually, the American submarine fleet just
was going merchant hunting.
Merchant hunting, yeah.
The Americans adopted the German strategy.
Do what the Kriegsmarine do.
Yeah. The British, the Germans, and the Americans all had an identical strategy, and famously, if you look up a graph of, we call it like ship tonnage that was taken out, so how many tons of shipping did you take away from the enemy, and this was usually merchant. And if you look at, it's like the Germans, then eventually the Americans will defeat the Germans in that because they take so many Japanese down. The Japanese are at the very bottom of the barrel. It's unbelievable because you look at it, the Japanese come into World War II. They're the dominant surface naval power in the Pacific. They have, they could have a larger submarine fleet, but they built them big.
They weren't they weren't the second largest. Because the States did have that title of being the second largest navy.
Well, because they have two different navies.
The British were the largest navy in the world, but Japan was the third largest navy. But the difference between the American fleet and the Japanese fleet at the time was the Japanese fleet was all modern vessels.
Yes, the Japanese put a lot of that.
Their entire surface fleet was designed for fighting a World War II battle, whereas the American fleet at the time was designed
for World War I. And another thing, there's this issue that all all of the navies kind of had coming into World War II. It's kind of called colloquially as the Big Gun Club. There is a belief that battleships were the most important thing in a navy.
It's the Mahan Doctrine.
Yes,
It's
part of it.
I bring that up often, the Mahan Doctrine, because it is like it was almost like a religion.
Well, it's the book that everybody read since the 19th century.
Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt read it also, and he idolized it. Like
Yamamoto read it. Every to explain to Justin who doesn't fucking know what the Monroe Doctrine,
Mahan,
not Monroe. The Mahan Doctrine. Basically, it was an admiral who had written a book about like how do you utilize your naval power to its utmost efficiency, right? So one of the things that he said is you build a prestigious fleet, and then you just keep it at port, because the threat of you unleashing the fleet, it's already doing 90% of its job. Because you don't need to win battles, you know?
That's the same as what we were talking about with Toronto.
Yes.
With the whole, we're just going to sit here,
Keep
but
it-
look what we got,
Yeah.
and if you want to come anywhere near us, you're going to get snake bit.
It threatened the
that's
entire
what the Turpitz does as well.
Yeah. It threatened the entire Mediterranean by just being at the port of Toronto, and the British had to come and try to defeat it. So everybody at the cusp, at the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, even the Russo-Japanese War, like they were obsessed with this doctrine. For the Japanese, like one of the parts of the doctrine is like if you're going to go out to fight a decisive naval battle, because the enemy's will to continue a war will be completely gone because you have ruined their chances of logistical lines. Because typically, unless you're literally two countries beside each other, you need to move shit. You have to transport shit by sea. But for the Japanese, tragically, when everybody was generally having the same idea that you take your submarines and you attack the enemy's merchant fleet, this weird doctrine they came up with, which has a little bit to do, funny enough, with Bushido, they thought it was dishonorable. They thought that this is not what you should be doing. And that's why they built their submarines larger and bigger. Like, they built bigger submarines. They wasted more iron to do that. They could have had a larger submarine fleet if they just built smaller submarines like everybody else. And if they had targeted the Australian and American lines of, supplies that were coming in, probably would have went better for them.
See, I don't understand their honor system. This is gonna catch me some flack. I don't understand the honor system. Like, okay, it's dishonorable to hit merchant fleets, but it's okay to,
War crimes?
I'm trying to find the words to describe a war crime. It's okay to take a medical ship and kill all
Their
the
nurses.
males and then rape all the nurses on the beach.
And then shoot at them when they're running.
Yeah, and then tell them to run into the
This is
ocean
famous,
and
right?
then shoot them.
See,
But that's not dishonorable.
No, they're very contradictory in the nature of that. But their doctrine lost the day because they do figure out, we should be using submarines against merchant fleets, but they figured out in 1944.
Something
basically.
I wanted to add on to a point you made earlier. So, out of all the players, the U.S. learns the most from World War II. Like, people can argue against me about this, but the point I'm trying to make is the U.S. looks at what the Axis is doing and what's worked for the Axis, and then absorbs that into their own doctrine and masters it.
But the U.S. came in to World War II completely unprepared. They were Greens.
Yep.
Their army was, I'm sorry to say, a joke. They had not properly trained.
They're really just getting on the world stage at
So
this point.
they had to learn from everybody else, and they just took the best that they saw from everybody, and you can see it.
and improved upon it.
But the Americans, during World War II, completely outperformed everybody in logistics. In amphibious assaults, no one, even to this day, understands how to properly do amphibious assaults. Only the Americans, and the logistical line of what they were doing in the Pacific, people say to this day, if there's like a World War III scenario without nukes, the Americans are the only ones who have any idea how you move people, provisions, and supplies properly.
The States still is king of logistics.
Yeah. And that's how you win wars.
And because the wars that they were fighting, that became pivotal to them.
They were going out.
Land war, U.S. Civil War.
Yeah.
It came down to logistics.
Again, it was industry and logistics.
So, quick question, because obviously when you talk about World War II era naval battles, those are your four big players that come up. USA, Great Britain, Germany, and Japan. Obviously, there were other navies and other players involved. France, Italy, whatever. But and I know some of my Dutch friends are going to hate me for not knowing, but what did
Canadian
the Netherlands
Okay,
contribute
I can
or
talk
what-
about this.
Yeah, because, you know, I think Netherlands and ships, I think Dutch East India, you know? I don't,
and you're right.
I don't
you're
think
right
of
on that.
warships when I think about the
less
Netherlands.
less so in the Atlantic, more so in the Pacific.
But you mentioned them before, and it kind of piqued my...
I'll end the podcast with this because I don't want to go like too. Sorry, I almost broke my computer there. I don't want to like lengthen this too much, but the Dutch at the very beginning of the Pacific War, they had their Dutch East India holdings. So technically, the main target of the Japanese Empire was them, because they had oil fields in Dutch East Indies.
Okay.
They were big prizes. Big prizes.
Unfortunately for them, there was a few islands in the way to get to them. So for the Japanese, it's at the end cusp of what we call like the 6 months of rampage, where they're invading everywhere, basically.
The Pacific Blitzkrieg.
The Japanese have to go through Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, before they can even touch places like New Guinea. They have to go after Java, Hollandia, all these kind of strategic places, but this is where the oil fields are. And the Dutch have already lost their country because in World War II in Europe, they're in exile. So their government's in exile. Basically, their government's operating out of Britain, but they've got all of these colonial possessions and colonial forces out there scattered about with nothing for supplies because they just have what they have. There's no boats bringing them anything because there's no home country anymore. And they've got, I don't want to make fun of him, but Hein de Poitre was the army, we'll call him the leader of their group of for land. And there was Dortmund who was doing the navy. Dortmund,
but he was leading Anbu for a while. Is it Anbu? Am I saying it right?
You mean AMDA?
AMDA, yeah.
So
Anbu's Naruto, sorry.
So at the very beginning of World War II, the Americans were very unprepared. The British wanted to be the head of everything, but they didn't have the naval assets.
But they were smart to consolidate their power together.
So they formed ABDA. So it was America, Britain, the Dutch, Australia. Basically, it was this unified command. So it was different groups of people. They got their ships together, and they thought that things would be harmonious, and it really wasn't.
There's a language barrier.
I mean, there was a lot of problems, a lot of equipment problems. So the Dutch end up having an unbelievably offensive-minded admiral who raids at the beginning. So as the Japanese are on their offensive and they're going and invading and doing all this, this crazy Dutch guy is attacking them, and he's providing results. He's actually taking out merchant fleets. He's taking down enemy surface vessels. So he's actually challenging them.
He was aggressive, and you don't see
it's exactly what you need
You
to do.
don't see that often in the beginning of the Pacific War.
Yeah,
aggressive admirals on the or just aggressive natured commanders from the Allied side.
Unfortunately for him, he had a handful of basically a few cruisers and a bunch of destroyers and submarines. So he didn't have anything really to fight with. So he was trying to figure out where isolated pockets of the Japanese would be, and he won some naval engagements, and it was kind of a war of attrition because as soon as he lost one battle, like he's almost lost everything, and that's what ends up happening.
He didn't have a resupply coming.
Yeah,
There's nothing. He's working with what he's got, but honestly, for the first few months, very effective because he did a lot more than I'd say some American admirals did at the beginning of World War II, and for the land battles, especially the battles in the air, the Dutch had freaking Brewster Buffaloes, so these outdated, terrible aircraft.
F2As, like
F2As, yeah. So they bought them from the Americans, and they fought they fought with what they had, and they did a decent enough job. But
no, that's a tough fight against a Zero. Buffalo, you're basically a slow moving.
It's a fat aircraft. It can't do much.
You're just a target. Yeah. Like with the F4F, not the F4F, but the F4 Wildcat, like
the F4F was the Wildcat.
Yeah, it was an improvement upon the Buffalo. Like still heavily armored, but it could technically, in theory, go up against the Zero with changes of tactics. We see that play out, and then when the Americans do get access to the F6F Hellcat, and then like the Corsair, and it's like they take all the lessons that they've learned up to that moment, and then they have like the most technologically
best
advanced
pilots, best aircraft. Yeah, they're gonna
just
win.
like, oh.
But yeah, to finish off this, basically, to brutally summarize, the Dutch fight a good fight for a few months, and then everything is taken over because there's no one who can help bolster their land forces. So Java and Hollande are the two like strategic cities in the New Guinea, and that they get taken out by the Japanese because the Japanese, there's no one contesting them out there. So
And they're
Not immediately.
the Japanese are also spreading their land-air wing, like they're taking airport, like and building new airfields, and they're just like creating a sphere of influence that's ever expanding. And the more that sphere expands, the more dangerous it is for an allied ship to be within that, because then all of a sudden you're not worried just about naval ships. Now you have to worry about land air power being able to find you at any time also.
But another thing the Dutch did, which was something the Japanese didn't foresee, the Dutch sabotaged their oil fields as soon as the Japanese showed up, and the Japanese engineers didn't have the specific knowledge of how to repair them properly, so it actually took a lot longer than they had supposed to get the oil going, and the entire war plan for Japan, even in China and everything,
was
depended
on getting those oil fields.
getting oil, and then you have to put it on ships, and then you have to bring it back to the home island and put it into things, and by that time, like, the Allies were going into their shipping lanes and attacking their oil ships and stuff, so Japan never had a hope in
So
that.
that was secretly like a big nail in the tire, though, like kind of.
Oh, and rubber. The Dutch had a bunch of, well, the British had rubber fields in Malaya, but the Dutch also had rubber in tin places. This was other resources they needed. And
They had oil, they had rubber, there was tin.
scrap iron was a big one.
This was the biggest source for the Dutch
magnesium,
economy.
magnesium. The other one there, they needed that. There was a bunch of random resources that the Dutch had. I mean, the Japanese, they literally just went to war. They needed the Dutch Indies.
As soon as the Americans put in their embargo, like the only plan was, okay, we stop expanding, but in order to expand, we need resources. And so it's like, oh, okay, do we expand or do I don't know how to say it. It's like,
Okay. But, because not that we're filming directly after this another podcast.
No, I'll change my shirt.
You're going to change? No, don't change your shirt. That's
I
fine.
don't have another shirt.
No, it looks good. But honestly, for this podcast, everybody, this was kind of off the cuff. We're not really preparing for this one or the next one, mind you. And just want to get kind of your feedback on the like more loosey-goosey conversations where we kind of just rant at each other, as this one kind of was.
Do you want to hear more about the Atlantic?
Yeah.
I want to have.
Well, we can do a proper episode on like a battle or a subject.
Like going into this, like it just came to the thought, like, okay, let's do the story of the Tirpitz.
Yeah, we can do the Tirpitz.
It's like we kind of like waded it into that territory today.
Yeah, but it's like this is like a more engrossing of a lot of different stuff.
Like, okay. So for those, the Tirpitz is the sister ship of the Bismarck, and it's actually the Tirpitz. Is it the Tirpitz class? And the Bismarck was a flagship? Or?
Well, there is a Bismarck class.
So
they wanted to build 2 other Bismarck class ships, and they went
I was
the Tirpitz
sure
is
if it's the Tirpitz. No, they're sister ships.
Are they? I thought the Tirpitz had its own class too.
They were supposed to be 4 originally, and then they only came out with the 2.
Well, Germany put a lot of paper.
I thought it was Tirpitz class, and Bismarck was the flagship of it. Could be the Bismarck class. I might be wrong. Viewers, if you could correct me.
Yeah, so, if you want to hear about that, actually, a few of you have come over to my YouTube channel to comment from even the other podcasts I do, asking I do certain things, and I'm going to be making episodes in the future, specifically with what you want. One dude, if you're listening, the story about Sternberg when he goes to Mongolia and starts the White Russian Revolution thing, I'm covering that in the Fall and Rise of China podcast. You're going to get it in probably a few weeks. Again, if you have the time, please check out my YouTube channel, Pacific War channel. You can go over to, well, if you're listening to this, you're probably listening to this at Podbean or Spotify for the Pacific War podcast. There is also the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel, where I have an exclusive Patreon podcast over there, and you get early access to all of my content. You get voting rights to what I'm going to tackle next. It's all for just $2 a month. Hey, I would really appreciate it. I also appreciate my two friends, Justin and Ian, for being in this.
Do I get a plug?
Do you want to do it again? Because
I know, every single time.
You have to tell me. Did anybody come to your YouTube channel?
I didn't look, but I did put a new video up of my newest Japanese warship.
Okay, so we're gonna do this again. If you guys really care about me, try to hunt down Ian. I'm gonna say the full name.
Ian Smith.
Ian Smith's YouTube channel. It's gonna be a picture of a guy with a. Not Ian, not my friend.
No,
but
it
another
is
guy.
a picture of Ian Smith.
This is really confusing for the audience. Okay, so there's a picture of a guy with a gun. He's famous from Rhodesia. You could put that together as you
Former
wish.
prime minister before it became Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And collapsed.
And the channel is mostly World of Warships.
World of Warships. There's a video of us playing League of Legends
back in the day. Actually, all three of us.
Yeah, all three of us playing up against pros. We get our asses kicked.
So go over there and comment, "I'm here from the Pacific War Channel," please. Thank you, and goodbye.
Bye, guys.